On this episode of Visionaries, we traveled to Detroit, Michigan to meet with Richard Stiennon and talk about the future of the cybersecurity industry. Now, Richard is a former Gartner analyst, security company executive, author, and currently the chief research analyst for IT Harvest. His insights are always thought-provoking and often controversial. Today's topic, the future of the cybersecurity industry.
Yeah, security analytics, I see this as finally delivering on the promise of your, infrastructure security play where we're going to collect all the data and we're going to tell you the important things to look at.
Even before the interview, Richard and I got into some really interesting conversations. Luckily, the cameras were rolling. So Richard, we're driving around here in Detroit amongst the big three car manufacturers. And massive consolidation has happened over the last 100+ years. How does that compare to what we're seeing in IT security?
You don't call them the big three, you could call them the last three. At one point, 100 years ago, there were over 150 car manufacturers, right? So all this innovation going on, and yes, there was consolidation. And that could happen in IT security, except for the outside drivers. So in security, you've constantly got new hackers, new attackers, threat vectors that are being exploited. So you will always have this constant percolation. And that's just going to go on until the threat actors pack up and go home. And between you and me, I don't think that's going to happen.
So what do you think is really the next big thing as it relates to threats? I mean, is it ransomware? Is it the insider threat?
I am a little worried about ransomware. About 3 years ago, when I was talking to those meetings of CISOs, that was actually their number one concern. And you know how CISOs work, it's the thing that they're worried about is the thing that the VPs and CEO are telling them is a big problem. And they get the call in the night, hey, my computer's been encrypted, what do I do? So they're encrypting huge amounts.
After a few detours, Richard and I finally made it to the interview, where he continues to expand on his thoughts regarding the cybersecurity industry and hot topics, like security analytics. So Richard, you and I were walking around at RSA 2016 in San Francisco, and just about everybody's talking about security analytics. And you've got the traditional players, the log management, the SIM solutions, but now you've got these more advanced solutions looking at predictive analytics and user identity correlation. Why is that so hot right now? Why is everybody talking about analytics?
I see this as finally delivering on the promise of your, infrastructure security play where we're going to collect all the data and we're going to tell you the important things to look at. SIM and log management, I still relegate to governance, risk, and compliance, because way back when COBIT, ITIL, and the rest of the frameworks were created, about the only thing you could do is log management. So that became a compliance requirement. So you have to do log management for compliance, but it's not very good for catching the types of threat actors that are breaking into, Lockheed Martin, for instance. So you have to collect a lot more data than SIM vendors do. So, machine data is, way down at the machine level, somebody set a rule to log something. That's why it's important to gather, network traffic, certainly access traffic and what people are doing, the user behavior analysis sector. And from that, you can finally start to see the things that you should pay attention to when you come in the morning.
What is it with malicious insiders that is becoming such a big problem today for the public and the private sector?
So 10 years ago, there was separate systems for accounting, and everybody had a web page, but it wasn't connected to the back-end databases. So over the last 10 years, most companies are now based on some sort of digital economy, right? So now they're much more vulnerable, and an insider can create a lot more havoc. So they can steal that data and sell it, as happened countrywide. They can break into the systems to cover their tracks and activity. So it's as we have more and more invested in our digital infrastructure that our exposure to damage from insiders increases.
So growth in our industry, everybody's got an opinion. Some people say we're going through huge amounts of growth still, others feel that it's slowed down.
Yeah, so I've watched from 2003 when most of the analyst firms, including Gartner where I was, were pegging the industry size at about $2.5 billion. And then by 2013, the analyst firms were reporting the industry was $68 to $74 billion. That is a 17-fold increase in 10 years. That's a compound annual growth rate of 34%. But I've looked at the data, and I've made my own, wild guess that the industry is going to grow at 24%, which is less than it has been growing. But the law of big numbers, it's got to slow down in absolute terms. 24% compounded annually means that by 2023, this will be a $640 billion worldwide industry. Brian, we got to try this Griffin Claw El Rojo. It's a red ale. It's brewed only 100 yards from here, just down the street.
Awesome. I'll take two. So, Richard, we've talked about security analytics, but one of the themes that I'm seeing that's really starting to evolve is incident prediction or predictive analytics.
It's got a history. People have been, and companies have been using it for years to measure, for instance, employee satisfaction. So just a test every day or something like that. And the idea was to predict when an employee was going to leave. Very, very valuable capability of security products.
So our interview is coming to an end, and I want to thank Richard for sharing his thoughts on everything from the security industry and where it's heading to insider threats and analytics. To recap, we talked about the growing risk of insiders and how log management and SIM can help with GRC, but security analytics is actually delivering. Richard also shared his predictions on industry growth of 24% or $640 billion by 2023, and a percolation, not consolidation, of security vendors to mitigate emerging threats. Now I gotta run because Richard is gonna make us some homemade pizza in his wood fire oven. I hope you enjoyed this very special edition of Visionaries, brought to you by Securonix.